This is the Promising Practices for Health Equity podcast, brought to you by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, a national leadership program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Hello and welcome to Promising Practices for Health Equity, the podcast created by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, affectionately known as IRL. I'm Cody Cotton, sitting in for Crystal today, and my co-host is the illustrious J. Robin Moon. Hey, Robin.
Hi, Cody.
Today, we will examine the program from a different perspective. Our guests today are Dr. Kathleen Call and Ms. Barbara Simpson Epps, also known as Miss Bobby. Hello, Kathleen. Hello, Miss Bobby. Thanks for being with us today.
Great to be here.
Kathleen served for over 9 years from the beginning of IRL as the Associate Director for Community Engagement. And Miss Bobby also has been with us from the very beginning, has been a senior advisor with us, and also led the Community Action Advisory Board, as in CAB, we say, since its inception in 2021. Is that right, Miss Bobby?
Yes, 2021.
Yeah. We're so happy to have you both here today. Before we get started, we want to invite you to just check in with us. As you know, and we've been practicing together, one of our core beliefs is that nurturing personal relationships is key to building the kinds of communities that collaborate effectively in the work towards health equity. So at the beginning of our meetings, all our episodes, we do a quick check-in to help us continuously build connection in our team, our beloved community. So here's our check-in for today. What is the one thing that makes you feel hopeful these days? Feels like a particularly difficult question, at least for me. I will start. I had to think about this. I think about the 5-year anniversary of the pandemic. 5 years ago now, we were in the very, very thick of it. And it feels like yesterday, and at the same time, it feels like 100 years ago. I think about how we actually made, I can't believe, if I sit and think about it, I can't believe we actually made out of that. And this life-saving vaccines and all kinds of innovations, and as community that we pulled together, and that we're here recording this podcast. So I am really grateful for that. And when I hit the lowest moment, which I did at the time, there will be a tomorrow. And I think about it these days, every day, since about March, that gives me hope. Can I toss it to you, Cody?
Please do, please do. I had some time to think about it. I would have to say the youth, and that's like two-sided, right? So I often think about the kids and the students we work with here in Chicago within youth mentorship, but it's very easy for me just to look at my kids here at home. I was quick to say my boys, but it's not my boys anymore. It's my boys and my baby girl as well. So
That's right.
my family, the family brings me a lot of joy, a lot of hope. Yeah. So thank you. I'm gonna toss it to you, Kathleen.
Well, I'm going to piggyback on your answer, Cody. So for me, when I want to feel hopeful and be reminded that there's joy and a future that could be amazing for us, it's really hard for me to get there, but I look at videos of my grandbaby, or I was at the march this past week, and there was this little girl on her dad's shoulders holding her own sign saying, "Hands off my future." And I'm thinking, yes, the next generations are going to save the world. Crossing my fingers. So I would say it's also youth and the joy that they bring and the positivity they bring to the world before they turn into cynical adults like us, like me. I can't speak for y'all, but I guess I pop it to Miss Bobby.
Well, I'm going to do a culmination of all of your responses. I think about the footprints, and the footprints that were laid before I came helped me and helped give me the determination, the strength, the resilience, the fight that I have for what I believe in. I see those same footprints being made by myself and each of you and others as we are traversing this new terrain, whether it's COVID or whether it's inflation or whether it's looking at what's happening with our democracy right now. We are all making footprints. And as I think about the young people in my life, especially my grandchildren, when my now 10-year-old grandson can talk to me about fascism and democracy and truly understand what that means for us, certainly some footprints have been laid that open up his mind to possibility and reality and what he wants and hopes for in his future. And I see that in all of our children. So I think about footprints that we make, and I know that they can step into what I've done, what each of you have done, and I know they'll do even greater things.
Hmm.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that. I said we have a lot to be hopeful for, all of us. Thank you for that. All right, let's dive right into it. Kathleen, you've been a part of the leadership team literally since IRL has began. Tell us what you remember about the original vision for the IRL at the time of development, and also what were your motivations and hopes for the program?
Sure. So it's a bit muddied, but I remember feeling like there were people like strategizing. There was this huge call, not just for IRL, but 3 other programs, and people like scrambling to be part of it. And I think for different reasons, right? For the prestige and the money, but also the vision. And I was really motivated by the vision. Like, I have been a huge fan of and participant in community engaged research from, pretty early in my career in different aspects of the kind of research I like to do and I think can be impactful. So the opportunity to like do a national program that was really encouraging that community voice drive and influence research and the solutions, like I want to be part of that. So I was motivated from the very beginning to be part of that movement, because it really was, I think, envisioned as a movement. You start with one cohort, they're scattered all over. There's another cohort the next year. And so I think just that the value of engagement and the value of doing research that can bring about change was huge. And so, yeah, and it's certainly evolved over the years, but that's my motivation was very much about doing engaged research, impactful research.
Thank you. What about you, Miss Bobby? What were your motivations and hopes for the program when you first got involved?
Well, when I first came into the program, I didn't come in through the same doorway that Kathleen entered into. I was presenting with another group to C2. And at that time, I met Michael, Oaks, Jen, Malcolm, Nancy Fishman, Sarah Golis. I met Kathleen and a lot of others who had sewed into the creation and beginning of this program. I was motivated and hoped to help in guiding the teams around authentic relationship building and the importance of community engagement. I really wanted to influence others about understanding the history of community, particularly those that they had hoped to plan to work with. And I wanted to have them filter some of my questions, like what has been the experience with community? What has been the community's experience with researchers? And how do you build on that? And who are the people in the community you want to engage with? So I wanted to really dig deep into the relationship and the history of community so that those kind of questions would be answered and asked up front.
Question for Kathleen. Looking back, the IRL, the research side of the IRL, and then community side of the IRL, I feel like we've been spending a lot of time integrating the 2 sides into one truly interdisciplinary and community collaborative work. And Kathleen, you served in the role of Associate Director of Community Engagement for the entire time, as you said, while both of you and Ms. Bobby represented and fostered the community's perspective, as in like the, as opposed to the researcher's perspective, you're an academic yourself. We're very curious to know what you have to say about how you approach your role and the goals initially that you set out to achieve through programs, and maybe particularly for our fellows, and whether it panned out the way that you had envisioned. It's probably not an easy question. Was there, like, what would you say the biggest surprise might be?
So that was a long question. So I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, I feel like there was like the program as it launched and then how it evolved. And then there's like my responsibility for a particular aspect of that program and how it evolved. And they're both, at first I was thinking, well, they're kind of separate things, but they're really not. They're really like, I think when we started IRL at the very, very beginning, we had this research-centric approach, and fellows were pushing back at that from the very beginning. And some members of the larger team were able to accept that critique, and others just tried to present the same material differently. So I think there was kind of these phases of evolution. And I think there was also, a diversity of response among different members of the kind of the leadership team. But I had honestly gone into it like when we were conceptualizing what are the things that we need to really train or prepare or provide resources for interdisciplinary research leaders. I think we took a very academic, as in one-way conversation perspective. Like, what do we need to give them? What do we need to give them? Not like, what can they give back to us? So I feel like that was the biggest evolution. So from really focusing on what do we have to offer? How do we want to set up this experience to like, are we meeting their needs? What are their needs? Actually having conversations around that. So I started in my own component of the program, Engage Scholarship, thinking about what do they need to know about community engaged research? What are its pros and its cons? How has it been received? Like, very intellectualized idea of what the program should be. And then we quickly learned it was like, how do we help people build relationships and see the assets of different members of their team and what they bring and what's their common goal? Like, helping them develop a common goal that helped them get beyond some of the conflict that's inevitable in a relationship. So it really switched from this kind of intellectualizing and thinking about how do I prepare folks, what resources will they need, to actually observing like relationships falling apart and thriving and, going through tremendous conflict and then coming back together as a team to say, no, we have to set this aside. We are here for the community and we can set aside our differences for the community and what we're trying to do together. So it went from intellectual to emotional, relational, and really listening and co-creating, that experience versus thinking, I know what's best. Mm-hmm. They know what's best. And how do I facilitate giving them what they say they need? So that listening component and relational component was huge. And just even like interdisciplinary is like, assumes that there's an academic disciplines, and that's how it was looked at. We're talking cross-sectoral, like just like variation in so many ways that each member of that 3-person team brings to what they're trying to accomplish, and like fully recognizing that, valuing it, and naming it, which we weren't very good at the beginning. I think we got better, but there's always room for growth. That was such a long-winded answer.
That, if we were to write an abstract of this long paper of IRL evolution, that would be it. I think you really said it really well. And I think that, step by step, it might not be very easy to see how much we changed, but looking back 10 years now, I think it's just so much obvious and clearer. And it's just really so humbling. Thank you for sharing what's in your heart, knowing you that really came from your heart. Miss Bobby, in our conversation with Nancy Fishman in the last episode, she talked about how important it was for the National Program Center to include someone who was from the community where the research is happening. So that would be you. Tell us about how you've seen this work throughout your time with IRL and how it might have evolved in your understanding.
Well, what I've appreciated most is, and I'm going to add some of what Kathleen talked about, is when I first joined, the term rigorous research was something that was always said. And I said, please define. I asked Michael Oakes, what is rigorous research? And we have many long conversations about it. And it just didn't land inside of me because of the language that researchers use. It was just something, this intersectionality of shared leadership with community leaders and researchers, interdisciplinary. It wasn't lay language. It wasn't language that community understood. And it was a three-legged stool. It set the odds up for there to be tension automatically. When you have two researchers who have the same background, somewhat similar experiences and understanding about that, and a community person who may or may not have ever worked with a researcher or with researchers before, I felt that just kind of jaded the impact of community voice being heard and being understood. I think that there was a lack of good communication. And communication is the legs and heart of how to build relationships. I don't know that there was real talk about shared values, about what's important to me from a community perspective, what's important to you as a researcher, understanding that researchers rely on these grants to get a check, to be published, all of the things that are inherent to them and this particular project and others. Never talked about flexibility and being able to pivot. Community people do that all the time. And always knowing that there is more than one way to accomplish a task and more. So I've seen, I say all that to say that I've seen it evolve in numerous ways. And I've appreciated most from a curriculum perspective that was so research oriented and intense that now it is more diverse and much more inspiring. The curriculum is. I remember having Research 101 and other topics that community people were to cover, and it was a headache. They didn't want to do it. They were boldly talking about not wanting to do it. And the community partners weren't getting much out of that curriculum. And quite frankly, I don't know that the researchers were getting that much out of the curriculum. What I do remember around the evolution is the founding of the EDI task force. The EDI task force pushed the needs of the community to the forefront in a lot of ways. And I remember having two subcommittees in the EDI task force, the accountability committee and the curriculum committee. Kathleen, which one? I don't remember which one you were on, but I think you were
probably curriculum, right?
I think you were on curriculum, and Paul and Ifra and a lot of the rest of us were on the accountability committee. And it was so great that we pushed and pushed and pushed, so much so that I believe it was in 2019 in the October Minnesota meeting that the roles of community and researchers began to intertwine. And it was a face-to-face right before COVID. And there were presentations. Kathleen and I did a session together. I remember Joe Salmon did a session I think it was on white supremacy, I believe, or something similar to that. There were a lot of sessions where community people got to work with researchers in a way that it was an equal pairing, an equal responsibility, and people stepped up. And there were so many topics that came up that it opened the door for more clarity, shared appreciation, and camaraderie. And since that time, of course, you said the CAB has been started. And since that time, I've seen things elevated in ways that had not been elevated before. Even the need to take care of yourself, which is really something that is often overlooked. But from a community perspective or research perspective, you cannot do this work day in and day out and not think about taking care of yourself. And so I think that I think the CAB came up with a recipe for leadership that I didn't see so much being talked about around leadership initially. All I saw was research kinds of things. And I just couldn't understand, how can you have interdisciplinary research leaders and nothing about what it takes to be a leader, either as a researcher or a leader as a partner with a researcher. I think if we talk more about leadership, and the evolution and probably the conflict on teams would have been less. I won't say wouldn't go all the way away, but it would have been less, because talking about what it means to be a leader means that you have to be able to figure out how you get along. How do you resolve differences? How do you bring information to and from? And how do you do things with, rather you and me? So I just thought the evolution over time has just been really great in terms of what I see today, first on what was initially started. The research is rigorous, but the relationships are better.
That's such a great answer. Yes, Kathleen.
I was just going to riff off of Bobby around like research rigor was initially like very like causal model kind of focus, like proof and evidence. And it really evolved to rigor as relevancy for people who can bring about change, and like authenticity. And so I completely agree with Miss Bobby on that. And this, like, like the early years, we didn't pay attention. It was like so focused on interdisciplinary and research that leadership, like what defines leadership, was kind of ignored or invisible. And I really credit some of the work that you did with us in the early days, Miss Bobby, around relational leadership, that like to be a good leader, it's not you dictating what others do. It's like, shared power, leading with rather than dictating, So it's like this idea of power sharing and recognizing the power of others on your team. So I just thought it became more explicit in the later versions of the IRL program.
I'd add to Kathleen, I'd just say that too, I think that researchers began to appreciate community partners in a different way and didn't see them as somebody that was going to pick up the bucket and do all the cleaning that they didn't want to do, but rather as a vital part of that three-legged stool, that if you didn't have everybody working together, it would topple over. And that changed a lot.
Yeah.
It's such a great reminder, Ms. Bobby, that it didn't just happen by osmosis. It took accountability. It took resistance and resilience of the community. We are the microcosm of the world, and that was well demonstrated in the way that we have evolved. That's how I see it. So I really appreciate the response.
I want to add one more thing too, because
Sure.
I feel like not mentioning Dr. Zinzi Bailey in my experience would be awful on my part, because she and I spent so much time together, as we still do, initially combating and fighting and pushing against this rigorous research. We would sit in meetings for hours, and at the end I'd call her or she'd call me and I'd say, what just happened? What was just talked about? And I mean, we would be completely like in a land of not knowing. And it took many walks with some of the leaders who were in place at that time to really help them understand that a foreign language and you're not valuing or hearing what other people are saying about how to move this process forward and how to have some longevity for people as they are rolling out this work in their communities. Longevity and sustainability.
Yeah. And that accountability, Miss Bobby, like expecting teams to like set aside differences, value each other, yet the leadership wasn't doing that. It was like there was a lot of deferring to loud voices that were holding up their PI ship. And then, you know, as that leadership changed to people who were actually listening to ideas around how things could evolve for the better. Like it, you know, it was kind of the beliefs about leadership and like separate from the fellows versus doing the work with the fellows. I think that was a huge change too. Like, you know, to lead, you have to be willing to do the same work as the folks that you're working with or leading. And so instead of being observers of the fellows and creating these experiences, like it became much more co-creating and participating in. And I think that was a really big shift. And I do attribute to that, like the openness of our evolving leadership of the overall program from like two epidemiologists, but one who really understands community and relational leadership and personal accountability to a program in a very different way.
Oh, and for our listeners, EDI task force, it's equity, diversity, and inclusion. We know the world says DEI, but EDI just rolls rolls off your tongue better. So we say EDI task force. Now let's take the IRL outside of us and into the world. What's next?
Yes, yes. I want to ask the question. I just want to make a very quick comment. I promise I'm gonna get right to the question. Miss Bobby, it just really resonated when you talked about being able to have shared values. That's very important within leadership. And I think it's amazing that IRL was listening because eventually you were able to lead and form the CAB, the Community Action Advisory Board. So a lot of progress there. Shout out to you. All right, next question. All right, this question will be for both of you all. So, how would you each describe the impact the IRL has made in moving us towards health equity?
Well, I would say that I think leaders, not just within this program, but I think leaders, even when I think about RWJF, and I think about many of the regional conferences I've had to the pleasure and the joy of attending, I think that leaders are listening more intently to engage in community. And I think their sessions, their language really is beginning to focus on community strategy and addressing things that community needs in order to be successful. I also think that it's highlighted the multiple areas of inequity within systems and institutions and in the community that help everybody focus on what's important. And I think health equity issues come in many forms. You know, prior to this work, I did some work with other entities here in town that looked at the grass and the green space, and they looked at the air that was being breathed in by traffic routes where certain people live. They're on busy streets, so they're getting all the fumes from buses and cars and breathing that in, and looking at the rate of asthma, particularly for young Black boys. And so the health equity issues that come in many forms, I think people typically weren't thinking about that. They tended to think about health equity only in the sense of what's happening in your physical body. And so I think IRL, the impact that it has made for me, and I think for other people, is really looking at the universe, that we were given a perfect planet with everything that we needed. And I'm really disappointed to see how we've cared for the earth. I remember my oldest granddaughter talking to me at age 7 about waste and plastic and gardening. And she really held me accountable to, okay, let's put all of the plastic in the right container. Let's put all of the aluminum foil in the right spaces. And today she's 32 and things have not gotten much better. As a matter of fact, I think it's even worse. But IRL puts you in that space where you have greater awareness, greater sensitivity, and you really want to work on health equity. And I believe that they've amassed hundreds of advocates, allies, and accomplices to move in that direction across this nation and to get the job done. And I think people are creative, they're more enlightened. And I just, if I had to find a program, and I've been a fellow in 2 other programs, I think by far this was probably the most powerful experience I've had, probably because I'm not a fellow and I get to sit on the other side and hear how well people plan, the leadership plans for everything, the number of discussions, thinking about every single thing, so that when they do come together, they have the kind of experiences that acknowledges their contributions, acknowledges them in this field, and rewards them in many ways that will charge them up and refuel them to keep pushing health equity as something that we all have to continue to think about and contribute towards.
I'm glad you went first, Miss Bobby. This was the question that I really thought of. I can think of a lot of different ways of approaching it. So, like in the grand scheme of things, we talk about dismantling structural racism and moving towards health equity. It's like, I don't think I'm going to see that in my lifetime, but what are the kind of the foundational things that I think IRL has really worked at to gift to each other and gift to the fellows? And that is this kind of intentionality around creating experiences where relationships can be formed. You see somebody as a human being with complexity and values, and not just an acquaintance that you run into at the conference every year. So like that intentionality about building relationships, creating a space for people to go deep if they are so inclined, but also not require it and make them uncomfortable with being in the space. So they're welcome, they're invited, but it's not demanded of them. And I think they've responded really well to that. And I think it sparked this kind of interest. Could I create this space in my future projects? And that's my hope, that it can really spark that centering of research as relationship, and relationships are required to have impactful research and to bring about social change. How did IRL model that for us? How can we do that for our work with students, work in the community, work amongst our boards as community researchers? And what's the future of research? Like, what does that look like in a really positive way that you don't usually get in academia, or a research 101 intended for community members, right? So it really got to the core of the heart of research, is like doing work that's important to you and that you hope you can have an impact on, even if it doesn't happen in your life. But are you creating a foundation of hope and co-creation with people so that they want to keep doing their best work towards that end? Again, I feel like I'm rambling, but it's like when I think about answering this question, it really is a question from my heart and not my head.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where we've done the most in evolving as a program, moving far away from the head and much more towards the heart of what research is.
I always think about some of the conflicts that we've had at some of that are inevitable when you bring people together, and I always think about the preparation and the thought given to the what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
And in spite of the what ifs, there's always something. But I always think about a couple of incidences that I won't mention, but I see how people have moved beyond that conflict. The grace, I think what it is the grace that I've seen, which is a part of health equity.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we like to take the human response out of the work that we do. the tension out of the work that we do, the natural reactions that people may have out of what we do. But I think I initially came in to do a session on ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which is all about trauma. And trauma is one of those things that lives in all of us. And when I think about health equity, how I've seen that show up and how everybody on this screen right now has shown up and responded to that, it makes me proud to be a part of a team like that. We do it with compassion. We do it with grace. We do it with amount of sensitivity to everybody that is included in that event. And I think the more we are living on this planet, the more we're going to be challenged about moving towards a structural and systemic racism in our healthcare system. And the only way to do that is to do it with a compassionate lens, so that you everybody together at the end of the day. And I could talk more, because I think about the restorative justice work we're doing, other things that we're doing. That is all a part about moving towards health equity in ways that weren't an original part of this work.
I 100% agree, Miss Bobby, especially like this idea of, from the very beginning, we talked about conflict is inherent in relationships. How do you move with the conflict, through the conflict? But we didn't have the whole harm and healing restorative justice that was really completed that picture. So it's one thing to say conflict happens and how do you grow from it? But also having the healing and recognition of harm part of it, that we didn't have that language and at the very beginning. And I wish we would have woken up to that sooner, and perhaps people were trying to get the group to wake up to that sooner. But I think it kind of helped fill a hole in how we were approaching the inevitability of conflict.
That's a practice. I think everything that we've learned around restorative justice and other practices about being human-centered, it's impactful. It's been impactful for me. It's impactful for other people. I've seen how people show up, and how when they have the time to really think things through and process things, that it leads towards better relationships, more understanding, authenticity, inclusion, grace, all of those things.
And health equity.
And health
equity. And these different levels, right? From microcosm, little relationships, to much bigger, the organization of how we've been doing our work.
Yeah. I think all those things, therefore, health equity. I'm just gonna note how all the vocabularies we're using in this conversation, we haven't said the word method once. Health equity means whatever statistics, improved, declined. This is a remarkable open conversation, and we really appreciate this. So we've been talking about how your impact on IRL, what you have contributed to the program and the fellows. This is our last question for you, both of you. Tell us about the impact that IRL has had on you. How has IRL changed you?
I would say it hit me at it came at the right moment in my kind of development as a academic and somebody who believes in the power of community. I talked earlier about intellectualizing the program, intellectualizing the problem of certain problems. And until it's in your heart, I think it's really hard to do really good work. And I think that was my evolution as a researcher, not just learning everything I could about a certain area or subject, to really knowing people that were impacted by just being open to the relationship, being open to feeling the pain of different things our health system does to people, not just reading about it, observing it, but actually like feeling it, having empathy and compassion.
Yes.
And that's where I think IRL kind of fast tracked that for me, because I met so many people that were doing amazing work and so passionate about it in a way that I hadn't been exposed to in most of the kind of academic circles I had been part of. And certainly the community, like it was like this blending of my two worlds, like living in academia, but working in and with community. And then having that all come together, it was just like, it was something that was so exciting. And I think I was ready for that, like being able to really see where I had to evolve along with the program and feeling safe to do that because of all the people I was in relationship with in this program.
I think for me, I never understood why I was asked to be a part of IRL. That's my honest answer. I didn't have a role. And I used to I like walking around and just being present in ways that people may not notice. I like to see how people twitch sometimes, or who walked with who, or who talked with who, or when people sat in a corner, why they sat in a corner. I liked just being in the space with people that I thought were just geniuses. I liked hearing them in small conversations that I wasn't engaged in. I liked sitting in a lot of the sessions. When I think back on all of the sessions that I sat in, all of the learning that I had, all of the remarkable people that I've met, the relationships that I have with people, and knowing that many of those relationships will continue. And I look back on how I grew over the program. I grew in all kinds of ways. Probably relationships I always thought I was pretty good at, but I've had some misses in that. And so that has helped me grow as well. But it's helped me really look at the human condition in ways that I hadn't before. Even when people come and they think that they are okay, people are always looking for a connection. And I have a greater sensitivity for connecting with people one-on-one in those spaces, especially when I've seen the same people that are continually standing alone, people who are introverts who don't speak up, people who I know have so much contribute and yet they are silent. So it's helped me in my walking around in spaces to not only observe, but to step up in ways that I hadn't before. And I'll always be grateful for that.
Wonderful.
Appreciate you all both for sharing. Well, thank you. And a lot is resonating. We know from just this past experience that working towards health equity can be daunting. It can be challenging, especially a large effort, given what the experience has been these days. Audre Lorde reminds us that caring for ourselves is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, which is an act of political warfare and an act of resistance. So with that being said, and keeping that in mind, tell us how you all are taking care of yourselves.
Well, I have a practice that I've always had for a number of years. I like to wake up in the morning early and I spend time with my God, just in meditation, just being quiet. I spend time thinking about what's going on inside of me so that I'm prepared to be decent with the world that is out there. I don't think I never want to take that part of me out into the world that I need to keep at home, especially when I'm not like at myself is a term that African Americans would say, that I wasn't clothed in my right mind. A lot of people carry a lot of things. And I take time in the morning to get all of those things out of me and to prepare myself to be a decent person in the world. Because just as I know that I have issues, I know I'm going to encounter people whose issues are mountains compared to mine. And so it's like complaining about a pair of shoes. and then you meet somebody that doesn't have any feet,
Hmm.
or complaining about not being able to do my eyebrows when you meet somebody whose face has been scarred and burned. So I think about, how can I be the best me when I show up in the world? And that's a habit that I've had most of my life, which centers me. It opens doors for me, because some days I'll say, well, you need to go out and take a walk. You might need to go out and have that bowl of ice cream that you've not had for a long time. And you might need to call somebody up and say, I was thinking about you. Or you might need to call somebody up and say, it's time for us to talk. It's those kinds of things that prepare me to meet the world head on and with my best self. And I owe that to me, and I owe that to the people that I encounter.
I think my self-care regimen is somewhat similar to Miss Bobby, in that I wake up early so I can have some time to myself. I wouldn't say I meditate, but I just like the silence and time to kind of reflect about what the day is going to bring and figure out how to be present for the day. I think, my favorite way of taking care of myself is being with people that I love. And some of those are conflicted relationships, but they're still people I love. And just being able to kind of linger and pause and not react, like that's the way I'm trying really hard to take care of myself and the people I love. Not reacting, pausing, lingering, and trying to work things through. And honestly, I'm like a ever-ready bunny. Like I need to expel some energy. So walking and biking is absolutely central to my self-care, because I just got to get the jiggles out. So it's all those things.
Pivoting is always important for me, because there's so many people in my life with 6 kids and 10 grandkids and 3 great-grandkids. I have to be able to pivot. And so I prepare my day with thinking about how I can step up or step back or step in or step away.
Mm-hmm.
Love that. That resonates. That's the RJ principle of ours. Knowing when to step up and when to step back. And Kathleen, I was sure I was gonna have to remind you that walking was one of yours, just in
Thanks,
case
me
you
too.
did it.
You thought it was going to be first, right?
I thought it was gonna be first. So I was like,
I was
all
like,
right,
wait, what about walking?
what about walking? Appreciate both you
Miss
all for
Bobby
sharing.
inspired me to be more self-reflective about my response.
Thank you so much, Kathleen and Miss Bobby, for being so open, being willing to be vulnerable in this space. You've said so much, but I'm thinking about Grace Lebog, a great American activist and scholar, who said, transform yourself before you transform the world. And I keep on hearing that as a theme. And that's also, I agree, that's something IRL, among other things, IRL has taught me. And thank you for our listeners for tuning in for this wonderful conversation today. We want this to be a two-way conversation, so we'd love to hear from you, listeners. Share your thoughts with us via our LinkedIn page, where we will post our show notes and any resources discussed in this episode. And don't forget to subscribe to Promising Practices for Health Equity so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us today. And remember, we're all on this journey together. And every step we take together brings us closer to a healthier, more just world. Until next time, bye, friends.
Promising Practices for Health Equity is produced by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, a national leadership program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. A special thanks to our guests, our production team at Studio Americana, and to you, our listeners, for being a part of this important conversation.